Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Casey.
Are our attendees in yet?
Yes, I believe so.
And Mark, you might need to make me a co-host, just a quick note. Well, hello, everyone. I hope we've got our attendees here. I'm Casey Sanders with Arkansas PBS. And we also have Hilary Trudell with us today from The Yarn. And we are talking about telling your own stories. I am a producer I've been with Arkansas PBS for, actually, it's been 30 years. So it's a long time. And as you know, Arkansas PBS is a storyteller. That's our business, particularly telling your stories. And we're going to turn it around a little bit right now and help you tell your own stories. And I'm going to invite Hilary to say a few words in just a second, but I do want to thank the Six Bridges Book Festival and Brad Moy in particular, because he's programmed this festival now 3 times. We were supposed to be here in April, live, of course, in person, and Hilary and the Yarn, we've decided to partner way back then to do this project. And so here we are virtually in October, and we're thrilled to be here. We've had a long partnership with the Literary Festival and now the Six Bridges Book Festival over the years, and we appreciate so much what they do and love being part of it. And we're glad that you're here, even if we can't be together in person talking to authors and about books. So thank the festival. We thank the festival very much, and thank Mark, who is our tech today, working with us. And so that's a little bit about me. We've got a question and answer tab that you can put your questions into. We also have the chat, and we'd really like to hear from you as we go along. So please feel free to use that, and let's be as interactive as we can today. So again, I want to thank Hilary Trudell and the Yarn for joining us today. They do wonderful work working with our Arkansas storytellers. And I don't know if all of our attendees are from Arkansas, so you might let us know in the chat where you're from. But Hilary, can you say a few words?
Sure. Thank you so much, Casey. And I want to reiterate, can you hear me, Casey, just to make sure?
I can.
Sometimes you just, on these Zooms, you talk and don't realize you're muted. Well, hi, everyone. I'm Hilary Trudell. Thank you so much for joining us. And I want to reiterate our thanks to the Six Bridges Festival. We're so excited to be here, even though it's virtual. It's really exciting that this is still happening, and excited to share storytelling with you today and to explore a little bit about what your stories are. We're going to give you some examples. We're going to talk about structure. We're going to talk about the power of storytelling. But to reemphasize Casey's point, we really want it to be interactive, and we want to hear from you as well. So you have the chat and the Q&A to do that. And so please participate if you feel so inclined. Just a little bit about the Yarn. The Yarn is a storytelling organization. We've been helping Arkansans tell our stories for about going into our 4th season now. So we produce shows around certain themes and get Arkansans on stage to tell their stories, or virtually, which is we are exploring now. So it's a little bit about the Yarn, and we're so excited to be partnering with Arkansas PBS on this project.
Wonderful. We are excited to be partnering with the Yarn. And, you know, one of the things about telling your own stories is that, you know, eventually you kind of want to share those stories. And, you know, it might be a family story that you share around, you know, family gatherings around the dinner table, and then maybe you share with friends. But maybe you'd like to take it another step, and you would like to share your story and get your voice out there a little bit further. And a couple of things that we're going to talk about today. The Yarn obviously works with people and helps them find their stories, get up on their feet telling their stories. And then we've also got a platform, a national storytelling platform that we're going to share with you today. So we've got a couple of things that we've got at our fingertips to help you once you kind of started thinking about what your story might be. A couple of different platforms that you might look into to share your story. And so I'm going to start with American Portrait, but never fear, we're going to also go into more about how to find your story and, kind of the nuts and bolts of what storytelling might be for you. But I do want to share something off the top. We have, with Arkansas PBS, been working with PBS National on a national storytelling project called American Portrait. And this is a place where people upload their own stories. So they pull out their phone, they pull out an iPad, they sit in front of their computer, they share pictures of their families, they talk about what life is like for them right now, whether it's a struggle or a happiness. There's prompts where you get to kind of kick off your story with the prompt that they've shared with us, such as what gets me out of bed in the morning. Now that led to a lot of pet videos, and it's just darling because most of us, if we have pets, they're the first ones to get us up in the morning because by gosh, they're hungry and they want to go out. And there's also what keeps me up at night. That leads people to a little bit more serious stories, and they run the gamut. But one of the things I want to do is we have the head of PBS programming and engagement who has sent us a welcome. And I wanted to share that with you all and let you know that nationally, people find our stories, our personal stories, our simple thoughts, so very important to share. So give me just a second and I will see if I can share my screen.
Oh, Case. Oh.
No.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Does that work? Okay.
Do you have it?
Hang on one second, everybody. I'm going to share the video real quick.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Go ahead and share this. And you should.
We don't hear it.
Well, I am not muted, so let me try one more time, see if this. Sorry, everyone, technical difficulties. 1 second. Let's see if I can just share here and then pull this up. Can you hear it now?
No. Are you using computer audio when you set the screen share?
Okay, let me try this. Hang on 1 second.
Has been telling the stories that.
There you go.
Hi, I'm Bill Margol, Senior Director of Programming and Development at PBS. For 50 years, PBS has been telling the stories that matter to our nation, and stories that matter to your community. This year, as part of our 50th anniversary celebration, we launched American Portrait, which is an opportunity for you to tell us a story that matters to you. And together, these stories might make us understand each other a little bit more and shed American today. Right now, when we're facing so many issues here in the US, and there seems to be so much that divides us, American Portrait allows us to see that no matter what our differences, no matter what the challenges, there are still things that we share and commonalities that unite us all. We're so glad that you're here supporting your community and supporting PBS, and we really want to hear your story. So go to pbs.org/American Portrait and tell yours, and spend some time taking in the thousands of stories that have already been shared. It'll make you realize just how important it is that we continue to tell your stories, the stories that really do matter. Thanks.
And we appreciate Bill Margol for doing that welcome for us here in Arkansas. And PBS American Portrait now has 10,000 stories on the website. And when you go to the website, and I just suggest you Google it, PBS American Portrait. Put PBS in there, it'll get you there a little quicker. Because there's a lot of American portraits out there, but PBS American Portrait. And when you get there, there are videos, and we've done a couple of documentaries around the stories that are there on the website. But you can also search the site. So you can actually go and find the Arkansas videos. Stories. If you are from another state, you can filter it by state, so you can see your state stories along with the stories from all over the country. And so when you are on the American Portrait site and you go to the homepage, you will see a bunch of thumbnails, and you can just click through and you'll see the different prompts. So if you want to see a particular vein of stories, you can. And if you want to get a little bit of inspiration of a story, like if you feel compelled to tell a little bit of your story, and like I said, this isn't your one and only big giant story. This is some thought that you might have today. It might be what you see out your front door when you walk out in the morning. And it might have to do with some serious topics like we talked about. But it is a wonderful platform. And we're going to encourage you after today's workshop to possibly go out and share a quick story out there. They're short. You can do 30 seconds. You can do a minute. You can do 2 minutes. It's actually designed to be under 2 minutes. So it's not a lot of preparation. You don't have to write it. You speak from your heart, and you can kind of see here, those are the thumbnails. So you can see along the one side, I stand for, looking ahead, my life right now. Those are the prompts. And then you can see the thumbnails that go across. You can also see the yellow squares where it says share your story. When you're ready, you click that. And when you say get started, it will give you the first thing that you do, and that is to register. And it's basically putting in your information, and then they'll send you an email. So you put in just a little bit of information, they email you, and then it'll give you a link to the rest of the submission process. And that way they know you're a real person, and then you know you're registered and you're in a safe place to share your story. Most of the stories are video. However, you see a few here that just have exactly the type. So you can actually just write your story. And as you see, you can be anonymous. It will tell your the information below where the city, you put in that information that you want to share in that spot. You can share an occupation, you can share other things as well. If you do put your name in, they will only share your first name and your last initial. So you can write a written description of your story, you can do a video of your story, or you can just put up still photographs. And you can put in more than one still photograph. And with those, generally you type just a little bit below it. So you've kind of got a caption below. So there's various ways, whatever you're the most comfortable with, if you'd like to, or if you're just interested in other people's stories and what people have to say, then it's a wonderful site to, it's sort of like falling down the YouTube, channel of your choice. This gives you another option to just check in and see what other people are doing and thinking right now. And you see there up at the top, the map view, that's just if you wanted to see all the states and kind of how many stories we have from all of the states. Of course, the larger states have more stories because they've just got a lot more people. And in Arkansas, I don't think the map tells us. We've got probably
95. Oh,
it says 95. We've actually got it's well over 100, and the map for some reason is slow at catching up with us. But you can see the Arkansas story thumbnails down there. You can see a lot of these newer ones have similar backgrounds, and that's because we went out to the Me and McGee market and talked to folks out there, and we actually collected their stories for them, which can be helpful. But you can see several here that they've done their own. And I think later in our talk, Hilary's got an example of a story that we're going to share with you. that kind of falls into both our baskets. It's someone who's posted to American Portrait, but it's also someone that's worked with Hilary in the yarn. So this is one of the platforms that we're featuring today, a place where you can go and share your story. But before we get to that point, let's talk about story, because that's so very important. And unless, Hilary, you have anything else you'd like for me to say off the top, I will hand the baton.
Thank you so much, Casey. Okay, so now we're gonna see if we can get our chat going here. So for those of you who are joining us, if you don't mind just getting in the chat and typing the first thing that you can think of, why is it that we tell stories? Why do we tell stories? And go ahead and just get in the chat there, and you can type a word or a sentence. Why do we tell stories? Let's see if this chat is working, and I will move on if it doesn't, but I am curious if we can get some participation. Why do we tell stories?
And hopefully you all can find the chat. It's at the bottom, and if you move your mouse cursor, it should show up at the as a little part of your bottom screen menu.
So while you're looking for that, and please, to remember and savor. Thank you, Andrea. Why else do we tell stories? So to remember and savor. I love that word, savor. Why else do we tell stories? It's great.
And while people are kind of thinking about that's so true, because I realize that the stories that I remember from many, many, many years ago, it's probably because I've been retelling it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've actually consciously thought, if there's something I want to remember, I need to make sure that I tell it a few times so that it stays with me.
So Karen, just kind of bouncing off that, Karen says to remember our lives, particularly as we get older. So to start what Casey was saying, Cynthia, to share memories that are important to us. Absolutely. To entertain our family. Absolutely. So to learn, to share history, to entertain. These are all reasons that we tell stories. We've been telling stories since we were able to communicate as humans. What does storytelling have the power to do? So we talked about why we tell stories. What does storytelling have the power to do? So obviously entertain, to remember. What else does storytelling have the power to do? To make sure our grandchildren know their history. Absolutely. Thank you, Karen. What other power does storytelling have? To teach lessons, absolutely. To teach lessons, make sure we're passing on history, to teach. We do storytelling at the Yarn for one thing, to empower the people that are telling their stories. So for the storytellers that I work with, actually exploring and sharing your story can be such an empowering experience, because you're speaking about your truth and you're owning your story, right? And you're sharing it with the community that you live with and saying, this, I exist, I am valuable. And for the people receiving the stories, experiencing different perspectives through someone else's eyes, through somebody else's story. Listening to story can help you have a different perspective on something, to understand a different point of view, to understand somebody else's experience that could be completely different from yours. And the other side of that, it's also an opportunity to connect, right? So storytelling, and we're going to get into this in just a second, requires a level of vulnerability, right? So to talk about yourself, to talk about your story, and story also includes challenges, which we'll talk about a little bit, that requires vulnerability, which allows people the ability to connect with one another. From Karen, if we were the only one remaining, it's our story and our perspective only, for sure. So everyone has their own perspective, and no one can disagree with my story, right? This is my experience. And so we learn from each other through our own perspectives and experience. And by listening to those, we get a broader view of the human experience. So if we could I want to ask one more question before we get into some structure. Why are you interested in storytelling? You can just put it in the chat. Why are you interested in storytelling? I know I'm interested in storytelling as basically what I was talking about with the yarn. I like to provide opportunities for people to gain different perspectives and to connect with each other. And I also think it's an incredibly valuable experience for individuals to be able to tell their stories. I see from Karen, I love to write. Yes, we get a lot of writers. Writers love to tell stories. Absolutely. Thank you, Karen. Why else? Why are you interested in telling stories? Casey, why are you interested in telling stories? But while we're waiting for some chats.
And, mine kind of comes from this angle of, I feel like my first thought is, why am I interested in telling other people's stories? Because I spend a lot more time thinking about that than I think about my own story. I've struggled when we started with the American Portrait Project. I struggled with, I don't usually turn this around on myself and figure out what is my story. And I generally have to be encouraged. If somebody knows I have a story, I have to be encouraged to tell it. And I feel like that's my job, is encouraging people to tell their stories. And that's why I love my job so much, is because I feel like I have a little card that says, you get to go talk to people and you get to find out their stories. I think writers are like that too, whether it's a real story or a fictional story. But just helping people, which is what you guys do so well at the Yarn, helping people, because we have our stories, it's just sometimes hard to find them and to tell them. And it's so important to tell them.
Absolutely. And we have some comments from Doris. I'm the oldest in my family and I don't want family history to fade. So keeping that history alive, absolutely, through storytelling. One of the oldest ways to transfer knowledge and keep family history alive is through storytelling. Andrea, to make a mark on others' lives before I die and later after I die, a kind of legacy. So leaving your story behind for others to learn from, right? That's great. Casey mentioned a little bit about the difficulty of telling one's own story. So I want to acknowledge that as well. As a producer myself, I do similar to what Casey does. I help people tell their own stories, but to be a storyteller yourself, and so speaking of myself, it's much more difficult because it involves a level of reflection, introspection, and vulnerability, right? So, but that is what is so empowering to both an individual and also allows others to be able to connect. How can we tell stories so people want to hear them? I have a question. That is an awesome question from Mark. I really appreciate it. And Mark is also our amazing technical support here. So props to Mark for being involved in this. But we're going to get a little bit into the how. And that's a really great transition. And I also could talk about this all day. So I want to make sure I'm keeping on time. So I have some really, we've talked about why storytelling is so important. But I also want to bring the perspective of, people from the writing world, from the business world, from the producing world, all have this incredible respect for the power of story. This is from Lisa Cron, who wrote Wired for Story. She said, story, as it turns out, was crucial to our evolution, more so than opposable thumbs. Opposable thumbs let us hang on. Stories tell us what to hang on to. So learning from what's been done before us. And then Steve Jobs, the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller sets the vision, values, and agenda for an entire generation that is to come. Powerful words there. And how do we do this? We do this through connection. We do this through telling stories that enable people to connect, either by seeing a completely different perspective, but touching us on a fundamental value or a fundamental level, I'm talking about values already, which we're about to get into, or to see yourself in someone else, right? So telling a story that somebody else completely can relate to and empowering them potentially to speak out and tell their story. And I have a lot of examples of that. We had a show on mental health, and the participants who got on stage and showed vulnerability and were brave and told their stories about their struggles with mental and emotional health and how that empowered other people to feel like they weren't alone, right? And to potentially speak up and share their experiences. And we do that through connection. So how do we connect with people? These are some pictures of casts of storytellers for different shows. So the first one to the left is, well, I should go back. This is our Out Loud storytelling cast from a couple years ago. This is a storytelling cast from our show on failure a couple years ago. And this is a storytelling crew from a cast on decarceration, a show on decarceration incarceration, with the organization Decarcerate that we did a couple years ago. And while all of these storytellers have different perspectives on a similar theme, the theme and their common values connected them to each other, right? So the bonds that it created between the storytellers themselves was incredibly powerful, because what we do with the yarn is we get those storytellers who are going to be in the show and we have them rehearse together. So they're able to connect with each other on common experiences, and that really creates an amazing bond. But how does it connect to people in the audience? We do that through values. Right, so this is a screenwriter. She did The Master of None. I don't know if any of you saw that on Netflix, but she says, I'm writing my stories so that others might see fragments of themselves. So even though, I had one of the first storytellers I worked with was a man who'd been incarcerated for about 24 years, and he had been out working for about a year, and we were sitting at a coffee shop talking about his story. And while his experience in life was very different than mine, the connection there was that I could see values in him that I also hold dear, right? So his hard work, his desire to be seen, his desire to be accepted, these fundamental human values that we all hold are a way to connect with each other. So how do we do that? Back to Mark's question, it's seeding our stories and our values. So thinking about what our values are, what are the values that drive you? I do this activity with my students every year. I have them pick 10 values. They're 10 driving values. And then I have them slowly get rid of them 3 by 3, or 3, and then 2. And they're left with 2 values. That doesn't mean the other ones aren't important, but what are your 2 values that stand alone, that if you had to get rid of all the other ones, what would they be? And those 2 values are your driving values. And what are the stories that spring from that, right? What are the stories that led to you having those values? One of mine is justice. And I always tell this story about justice and safety. And I always tell the story about when I was growing up, my older brother used to be bullied. And so this value that I have of safety and protection and justice for him is something that came from when I was very young. But justice and safety are very important to me. So I want to make sure that all children are safe. So that's something that this value that I hold so dear came from this story of when I was growing up. So values, I want you just to think about your driving values. And I'm going through this content pretty quickly, but we have some examples and I want to make sure we have time to share them. But I encourage you, as you're thinking through your story, before even trying to think of a story, thinking about what are my values, and not just, I have, there's so many values that we connect, but what are your driving values? So what are the 1 or 3 that you will hold on to no matter what, right? And what are the stories that spring from them? Because even, again, if we have different experiences, we have similar values. We might have different religious beliefs, cultural upbringing, political beliefs, but our values, our common values are pretty similar, right? And so what are the ways that we can connect with others despite our different experiences? Okay, so let's really quick, and if you're a writer, you probably talked about these concepts already, but I'm going to talk about basic story concepts, right? So once you know the basic story concepts, it doesn't have to be in specific order, but it's knowing the rules so that you can break the rules, right? So when I introduce storytelling to all of my storytellers initially, I talk about the character, who is you. You are the star of your own life. You're the star of your own story, right? Thinking about something in your life that you want, right? So all of these American Portrait prompts, when one of them sticks out to you, like your American dream, that's one of the prompts, is my American dream. So think about something that you want in your American dream, right? If that was the prompt that stuck out for you, what is it that you want, right? In any story, somebody wants something. If you have a story where no one wants anything, then that story is not going to be very compelling, right? So in the story of your life, what is it that you want? And this could be like big, ultimately what you want in your life, or in a situation, what you want in your life. So I wanted to go to grad school. All right, so you have something that you want. What is something that got in the way of it, right? What is the challenge that gets in the way of you getting what you want, right? So in any compelling movie, book, song, even, there's something getting in the way of what somebody wants, right? And that character, you have to make a choice. How are you going to try to get what you want? So you have a character who has a challenge, a choice, and then ultimately you think about the movies that we have, we learn from. And that's where the character changes based on their journey. And the journey being, I wanted something, I the challenge that got in the way, and I changed because of the result. That doesn't necessarily mean I got what I want, but if I didn't get what I wanted, I still learned from it and I still changed. If you have characters that don't learn and don't change, they're usually not very compelling. When you think about your favorite characters in literature, in film, in TV, if it's somebody who never learns from mistakes, it's probably not going to be a character that you're going to love watching, right? Unless it's for comic relief. So let's look at some examples really quickly. So we have The Wizard of Oz, we have Black Panther, and we have Finding Nemo. I'm not going to go through all of these, but just to give an example of this structure and how it can apply to almost any movie, right? And especially Pixar movies. You think about Finding Nemo, and who's the main character? It's not a trick question, but Marlin, let's go with, there's kind of two stories in Finding Nemo, but Marlin, the dad, is the main character that we're going to follow in Nemo. And at the beginning of Finding Nemo, he's very cautious. He's afraid. He doesn't let Nemo go off the reef because of his backstory, right? Which is there was some barracuda that killed his whole family, and Nemo also has this little fin. So Marlin is very afraid. Because of the controlling behavior, Nemo rebels, right? And he swims off the reef and he goes to touch something and he gets caught. So the whole journey that Marlin has to decide whether to go on or not, and it's in the title, is to find Nemo. Marlin, more than anything, what does he want? He wants to keep Nemo safe, right? He wants to keep Nemo safe. So he's afraid, he wants to keep Nemo safe, and now Nemo is across the ocean. So he has this challenge getting in the way of getting what he wants, which is to keep his son safe. And he has to choose, do I stay here on the reef, or do I journey out into the ocean and face my fears, right? And he has to go through all these challenges like the turtles and the jellyfish, and he meets Dory, and ultimately he finds Nemo. But the lesson of this story is how Marlin changes, right? So his journey creates a change in him, right? And how is he at the end? He's braver. He's like the fun dad. He lets Nemo have more freedom. He's happier with himself, right? So that's just an example of the story structure. And each of these movies that I'm showing, it has the same thing. The main character wants something and then goes on a journey, and that doesn't have to, in a lot of these, it's a physical journey, but that doesn't mean you have to have a journey story, right? It's just this examples of this structure. So that's a really quick idea of the story structure. So I want to look at this example from American Portrait so we can kind of break it down, and then we're going to watch a couple videos to show you how you can also apply your story to American Portrait. So I'm just going to read this. My American dream is a dream in the making, a dream that started as a nightmare. I was born in the US to illegal immigrants who were fleeing Colombia. My father got deported and my mother had to struggle with two very young kids without speaking English. Eventually, we all had to leave the country, but the simple fact that I was born in the US granted me citizenship, which I used to come back at the age of 18. I came back to follow my dream and study neuroscience so that I could get a step closer to understanding the human mind and its mysteries. I struggled readapting to the culture, finding employment, navigating the US educational system, and homelessness, but I was able to join the Navy, stabilize my finances, and advance towards my educational goals. And now I prepare to transfer into my desired major. This is from Marco. So let's break it down. What does Marco want? Marco wants to follow his dream, right? And become a neuroscientist, right? So that was what he wanted. There are things that got in the way. His basic upbringing, when his father got deported, his mother struggled. He struggled to get back to the US. He struggled with his classes, and he had a choice to make. Do I give up on my dream? Do I still keep struggling with my dream? What are my choices that I'm going to make? And he chose to join the Navy. He was able to get into the education system that he wanted to get into and stabilize his finances. And now he's pursuing his major. So that's the structure that we've talked about, you can see here. And this is also an example of how you can put just writing in your American Portrait prompt, right? Here's text and a picture. So let's look at a couple more. This is Arnetta. I love Arnetta. I worked with her through the Yarn and Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation, and I'm just going to show her video, and let's talk about it.
I hear dreams should be followed because they bring you happiness. I had one, and every morning I wake up living it. I leave my cozy little home to serve hundreds of hungry little smiling faces. My favorite people call me the lunch lady. When I was their age, I admired the school lunch ladies and wanted to be one. Every chance I got, I would watch them roll out dough or pick beans. I was fascinated watching the old ladies dump trays. I even told my favorite lunch lady, one day I'm going to take your job. Guess what? I did. Well, the not so exciting part of being the school lunch lady is it gives me a whole nother title. Alice. Asset limited, income constrained, employed. In other words, the working poor. I've got more bills than phones available. Robbing Peter to pay Paul, or trying to get blood from a turnip, however you want to say it. My dream job just doesn't pay enough. On the 15th, when payday hits, I'm already behind 5 days, 5 steps, and 5 thoughts. So tell me how to turn my current nightmare back into my dream. See, I thought when I grew up, I would have a big house and fancy cars, but my reality is I'm struggling even with HUD. But I keep praying to hold my head above water, and surely the Lord does provide, because we can't take hot showers, and there's something to eat in the fridge. I guess it's a privilege to be there. I am testifying that I survived being Alex when I really wanted to be the Jones. I've got steak taste on a noodle budget. And when I thought I'd been challenged enough, COVID-19 came through and made me and my crew essential workers. We went from unknowns to a half a page in the newspaper. Like we were some kind of celebrities or something. No, we just heard the words, if you want to eat, you gonna hit them streets. Almost like they were pimping us. So, you know Alice is in no position to turn down homes. Lights, water, gas are just a few other things that still have to be paid, no matter what. Matter of fact, my dream or nightmare, I'm not really sure what to call it right now, currently has me in quarantine from being exposed. So I pen these lovely words from my bed as I eagerly await a pardon to go back to work, because time is money, and I really can't afford to waste either. Currently dreaming of being free.
Awesome. So that was Arnetta. She is one of my favorite lunch ladies. You know, and the story, well, I want to ask in the chat, what resonated with you about Arnetta's story? Casey, what honesty? Yeah, absolutely. She was being completely honest. What else? Casey, what resonated with you about Arnetta's story?
Her dream. And you know, I just love her story too. And it's like she had a dream and she says she's living her dream. And you know, how many of us get to say that really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I love her honesty. You know, so when we think about the story structure, what did Arnetta want? She wanted to be a lunch lady. So she essentially was getting what she wanted, and then that shifted into how can I get what I want while also being able to provide for myself and my family, right? So she talked about her struggle and um, her efforts to, you know, provide, and how that was in itself challenging for her, right? And then the story shifted into, now all I wanted is to go back to work, right? So there were multiple stories within Arnetta's stories, and you saw the challenges and how she was trying to address them, right? So it's another example of, you know, here is my story, here are the challenges. I want to be pursuing my American dream, but these are the challenges that keep getting in the way, right? So we're going to watch one more. Let me share real quick. And this is actually a two-parter, and his name is Justin Booth. And he is, if you don't know Justin, he's a bit of a celebrity storyteller in Little Rock. And I'm going to show both very short, because they're a little bit connected. So this was answering the prompt I never expected from Justin Booth.
I never expected to be alive this long. I was addicted to drugs for like 30 years of my life.
Sorry, can you see it, Casey?
No, we can hear it, but we're not seeing the video. We're seeing the PowerPoint.
Hang on 1 second. Let me get it. Here we go.
6 years of my active addictions. I was homeless. I never expected to be alive this long. I was addicted to drugs for like 30 years of my life. The last 6 years of my active addictions, I was homeless. I slept outside on sidewalks. I've seen other homeless people die. Lots of junkies die. Violence or just circumstances, whatever, people died. I remember one Sunday asking the old tramps what would happen to us when we passed. You know, all the old tramps, they were older than me. And I could tell when I asked the question how they stirred around that they thought about it before, that they had an answer. Mouth was Jimmy's chin just hit his chest. Bump Shop Bill turned and looked at me and said, well, they'll cremate us. You know, they'll cremate our bodies, and they'll put the ashes in a cardboard box. And then assuming nobody comes to pick up the box, you know, they just throw it away. It'd be trash. We're homeless people. I never felt more disposable than I did right then. I never felt more mortal. I never really thought that I'd be alive this long. I thought I'd been thrown away in a cardboard box.
Okay, so that's the first part of Justin's story, and I'm going to show one more, and then we're going to talk about it.
My American dream started for me on the sidewalks of downtown Little Rock, where I lived. I lay there at night, pretend I was a well-known writer, that I was being interviewed by people about my writing and my experience as a homeless drug addict. I would imagine reading in New York City or maybe Oxford, Mississippi. Days I'd sell a little Kinko's printed chapbook I'd put together. One day I sold one to a guy that was a columnist for a local paper. He also taught creative writing at the University of UALR. He printed some of my stuff and wrote a couple of good stories about me. Things started to change. Larry Brown's family has had me out to their place. I read every year on the Lower East Side at some great iconic venues. Poetry saved me. and I'm living my American dream. I always tell people that I'm the luckiest man.
Okay.
Okay, cut.
Okay.
I love how he cuts. All right. So with Justin's story, he gives you two parters. He, you know, in the first story, we really hear about his struggles, right? So what's going to happen to me when I die, right? And so he's living on the street, and there's this potential for him to be cremated and put in a cardboard box and thrown away. It's like this visual he gives us, right? So the second story really goes on to, you know, so we set up, these are the stakes, right? The stakes are, you know, I could be nobody, I could be cremated. In his mind, he could be thrown away like trash. And in the second story, you get, what does Justin want? And he wants to be a famous writer, right? And so what does he do? And you already know his circumstances, right? He's on the streets, he's taking drugs. So what does he do to try to pursue that dream? And he, you know, he puts together little booklets of his writing, of his poetry, and he starts handing them out. And he gets attention that way, and he starts getting published. And so he starts getting known for his writing. So he makes a choice to start pursuing that in the way that he can, and that it's a small choice, right? And he starts giving away his pamphlets and starts getting recognition. And because of that, how has he changed? He feels like he's lucky to be alive, right? And I also know Justin personally, and how he has shifted his life because of his dream and his pursuit of it. So those are some examples of how you can both use the structure, the story structure, and, you know, we don't have a lot of time, but thinking about the values that are inherent in both Arnetta and Marco's and Mark in Justin's dreams, right? And in Justin's and Arnetta's stories, right? What are the values? The value to be somebody, to be recognized, to be valuable, to the pursuit of education, you know, the value of being able to provide for your family, the value of doing something that brings you joy, right? So thinking about how you can see yourself in all of these stories or not, but what are the innate values within them? I can see a piece of myself in every single one of those stories, right? I really value being able to pursue education. I really want to be able to provide for myself and my family and also do something that brings me joy. And, you know, like Justin, I want to be someone who is valued, right? And as I think we all do. So those are just some examples. I'm going to share my screen and give it over to Casey to just give a few more ideas about how to post. But I just want to pause real quick right here before we go there, Casey, just to see what questions people have or comments, because I know I've been throwing a lot of information at you, but do we have any questions from the audience about either the structure or the stories that we just shared with you? And you can just put it in chat. Okay, so feel free to just keep thinking, and if you do, just go ahead and put it in chat. I'm going to share my PowerPoint one more time so we can talk about moving forward and how you can start. Oh, one more thing, Casey. So just so you can start thinking about your story, because as Casey said earlier, it's really, it's not always easy to start telling your story. So, right, what are the things that you can do to start crafting your own narrative? And so this is what I would challenge you to do. First and foremost, think about what you want. So when you're on the American Portrait, or if you're in any situation where you're going to be telling a story, but if you're on the American Portrait site and you're scrolling through the prompts, think about ones that stick out to you. And if you can think about, okay, what's my situation and that I wanted something, right? So if it's my American dream, or what keeps you up at night, or what gets you out of bed in the morning, what is it that you want? And what is the challenge that's potentially getting in the way of you getting what you want? And then, so again, we have the character, which is you, the challenge, the choice you made or will make or want to make, and then how you're potentially going to change. And you might be in the middle of your story, right? So you might be in a situation where, hey, I really, really want this. This is what's getting in the way, and I'm going to make this choice. And you might not know what your change is yet, and that's okay. That's still a story. That's still something that we can relate with, because we're all humans and we're constantly growing and changing, right? So you might be in the middle of a story but you can still share it because it's still going to be compelling in that there are things that we can connect with. So I guarantee, if you don't take anything else away from this, just think about challenge, choice, and change, and how you can apply that to your story and your experience. And the last thing that I'll say is stories are, they develop, right? So as you tell your stories, they're going to change, they're iterative. And the more you tell them, the more you'll learn about yourself, the more other people will learn about you, and the more your stories will change. So I just encourage you to just take that first step and start telling your story, right? So just start trying. And the more you do it, the more comfortable you'll feel. I hope, and I almost want to guarantee, the more empowered you will feel. I've worked with almost 250 storytellers for the past 4 years, and every single one of them feels empowered by the experience. So I really encourage you to step out there and try to start as well. So with that, I'm going to just give it over to Casey to wrap us up.
Thank you, Hilary. And I just want to encourage people while we've got these last little moments, I will start going through this, but I really would love to hear from you all in the chat. And Hilary is such a wonderful resource. So if you are a writer, if you are a storyteller, if you just want to get better at telling your stories, please put your questions in the chat. Also, let us know what you thought about Justin and Arnetta. I know we did talk a little bit about Arnetta's honesty, but we'd really like to hear from you before we get away from here. So please do chime in on the chat if you can. And Arnetta's video and Justin's videos are on the American Portrait site. That's where we pulled those from. They both have longer versions of their story that are on the Ask Alice or See Alice website. And I don't know if you all caught that. Their stories were part of a project. Alice is an acronym, and I think Hilary will have my back. It's Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed. And in Arkansas, it was hashtag C, S-E-E, and then the name Alice. And that is to tell a story that we've got a lot of people in this country that are employed. They're actively employed, and they might work 2 or 3 jobs, and yet they might fall just below the poverty line, but it's not enough to make ends meet. And the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation had supported this project, and a way for us to partner with them, us being Arkansas PBS, is that we ask them to take their longer stories and share them with us in this smaller way via American Portrait. And we've been putting those out socially for a campaign over the last 2 months. And so those were some really important stories. You see on the screen the family of us, a PBS American Portrait. They've done several specials. In Arkansas, we've got a documentary coming at the end of October called Generation Nation, where they looked at different generations of stories. We have another one coming in December that's called The Story of Us. And that one we hope to have an Arkansas story embedded into. Again, I don't know if you all are from Arkansas that are attending with us today, but I can tell you that from the Arkansas perspective. You can see the different specials on the website that have already aired. You see the little icon there that says episodes, so you can see those specials, check out people's stories. Log on and share your story. So if we've inspired you at all, we would love to see you out there on American Portrait. And we would love to see you connect with Hilary and the yarn. One day, hopefully, Hilary will be back on stage again and not just virtual. You pick a theme. Again, we've got the prompts and things like that, so make it really easy. I think you've probably had a chance to see that screen. But create your video before you go to register, because you'll want to have that ready to upload. And that's it. I hope, if anything, we've encouraged you to think about your stories. If you're already a writer, then maybe you'll tackle this in a big way. But anyway, that's all from me today. Hilary, do you?
Yeah, Thank you so much, Casey. I just want to say thank you so much to the Six Bridges Festival again, and to Casey with Arkansas PBS, and Mark, who has been our amazing technical support. I did have a question from somebody about reading a story, and that's absolutely okay for the American Portrait prompts. I don't know if you noticed, but Arnetta was definitely reading something that she had written. So not everybody feels comfortable having memorized and then reciting for the American Portrait prompts, and that's absolutely okay. For the yarn, we work a little bit more on memorization and telling from the heart, but it's hard, right? Especially if you're a writer, to not stray away from that. So it's absolutely okay and appropriate to read something that you've written. And I just want,
we also kind of say show and tell, even for American Portrait. So, you know, sometimes that helps the storyteller. If they're talking about family, they can share a photograph. If they are talking about their environment, to share their environment. And so sometimes it helps to take your phone a little off of yourself for a moment and move it around. So.
Yeah, and I'm just gonna put really quick in the chat the website American Portrait, so you can just follow it on the chat if you need to. But we really encourage you to, you know, go check out the prompts. Look at other people's, you might be inspired that way as well, but baby steps, right? So if this is your first time and you want to just write something and put a picture, that's totally cool. And you might feel like next time, okay, I'm going to do a video and I'm going to read, and then next time maybe I'm going to do something, you know, a little bit more memorized. It's really, again, it's a process. When I start working with storytellers, a lot of times we just sit down and I ask them to tell me their story. And they don't have to prepare it at all. They just need to tell me. And then I ask questions, right? So as you're telling your story, ask people that you trust for feedback. What stood out to you? What resonated with you? What do you want to hear more about? And that really will help you understand, you know, to Mark's point, how do we tell a story that people want to hear? Start telling stories and ask them. I worked with somebody running for city council recently, and he was like, you have to figure out your audience, right? What will resonate with them? But that's kind of the next step, right? So I would just say, first step, just start sharing. And then, you know, ask your friends, ask your people that you trust, what do you like? What did you like about that? What did you feel good about? And being vulnerable is hard. So do it, you know, step by step. Any final questions for Casey or myself in the chat? We've also, Casey, what is your email address? I can put it in the chat too. I put mine up top. We can
put csanders@myarkansaspbs.org. And I can help all of you navigate American Portrait if you want to do that. Hilary and I can both connect you to lots of resources beyond the ones that we've talked about. And I just want to thank everyone again for joining us today. And again, thank Mark. I thank Hilary for partnering with us. We've done several workshops now around storytelling, and we love our partnership with the Yarn, Hilary. So thank you so much. And again, y'all enjoy the rest of Six Bridges Book Festival. We thank Brad Moy and his team for putting us all together today. We've got another minute, so if you've got a burning question, we can still get one in, but we really thank you all for being here.
Thanks, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of the festival, and we hope to see you soon. We'll stick around for one more minute, but otherwise, enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.